Welcome to this explainer. Think back to the last thing you grabbed at the grocery store. Maybe it was a bag of chips, a chocolate bar, or some dried fruit. Honestly, chances are it came wrapped in this flimsy, crinkly piece of plastic, right? We tear them open, toss them in the bin, and basically never give them a second thought. But, well, those seemingly harmless little wrappers represent one of the absolute most stubborn environmental challenges on the entire planet. I mean, they're engineered to literally last forever, yet we only use them for, what, 5 minutes? So today we're getting right into the thick of this issue.
Which brings us to the big question, the central dilemma we're unpacking today. It sounds like an incredibly obvious fix, doesn't it? If plastic is the bad guy, let's just swap it out for paper. Paper comes from trees, it degrades naturally, it just feels inherently better. But as we're going to see through our breakdown of recent insights from the Circular Economy show, solving a massive global supply chain crisis is, well, it's really rarely that simple. Can paper truly replace plastic? Or are we just, trading one giant environmental headache for another? All right, Section 1, the flexible plastic problem. Let's get into it.
So, flexible plastics. We're talking about films, pouches, wrappers. They are an absolute nightmare for our current waste systems. Why? Because they're incredibly lightweight. They literally just blow right off sorting belts. They're notoriously tricky to collect. But actually, scratch that. The deeper issue is what they're made of. They're usually these multiple fused materials. So you might have a layer of plastic permanently glued to a layer of foil just to keep your snack fresh, and our recycling machines, they simply cannot pull those layers apart. It makes them exponentially harder to sort and recycle compared to, say, your standard hard plastic water bottle. The result is that these materials totally bypass our infrastructure and leak into our oceans at a staggering, mind-boggling scale.
We all know the immediate risk flexible plastics pose to our oceans, for sure. So jumping to a paper substitute feels like the ultimate easy out. But that seemingly harmless switch, it carries massive, hidden supply chain risks. Think about it. If we blindly trade every single plastic wrapper for a paper one, without a real strategic plan, we risk trading ocean pollution for mass deforestation. A simple one-to-one substitution without a systemic overhaul basically means we're walking straight into a brand new ecological trap.
Moving on to Section 2, searching for a substitute. To figure out how we actually navigate this mess, we're leaning on insights from 3 heavy hitters from the source material. And they're coming at this from entirely different but totally crucial angles. We've got Laura Smith from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They're basically the standard setters defining what a circular economy actually looks like in practice. Then there's Jonathan Gill over at Unilever, representing the corporate giant dealing with the cold, hard logistical realities of doing this globally. And finally, Valerie Langer from Canopy, who acts as this essential watchdog for raw materials.
Now, understanding the motivations here is absolutely crucial, especially on the corporate side. Like, why is the specific type of flimsy packaging such a priority for a massive brand like Unilever? Well, it's because flexible plastics make up a colossal chunk of their global footprint. We are talking about billions, with a B, billions of sachets, pouches, and wrappers pumped into the market every single year. A company operating at that kind of scale just cannot hit any real sustainability targets without tackling this specific material head-on. They don't really have a choice. They're forced to prioritize flexible waste.
So Unilever structures their response through a really clear step-by-step strategy. Step 1, acknowledge the sheer billions of unit scale of their flexible plastic footprint. Step 2, roll out a unified global strategy for waste reduction across every single one of their brands. But Step 3 is where reality hits hard. Step 3 is all about navigating the massive, complex logistical barriers to actually getting those alternative materials to work across wildly diverse global markets.
Which naturally leads us to ask, what exactly are those barriers? Like, why isn't a massive global brand just flipping a switch in their factories and pumping out paper wrappers tomorrow? Well, because scaling globally means entirely overhauling multi-million-dollar machinery. It means completely rethinking product shelf life, because let's face it, paper doesn't block moisture the way plastic does. It means totally altering supply chains to make sure a new paper wrapper actually survives the trip from a humid factory to a dry store shelf halfway across the world. Swapping to paper on a worldwide scale is honestly a monumentally complex logistical undertaking.
All right, Section 3, rules for responsible paper. To stop companies from jumping out of the plastic frying pan and straight into the deforestation fire, Laura Smith and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have laid down 6 critical criteria. And these rules, they bring real teeth to the table. For instance, they mandate that companies have to prioritize recycled content first, before even thinking about cutting down a tree. They demand that if virgin paper is used, it only comes from strictly sustainably managed forests. And this is the kicker. They require that the paper packaging is actually recyclable in practice, in real-world facilities, not just theoretically recyclable in some fancy lab.
So this framework obviously demands rapid innovation and incredibly strict standard setting from the whole industry. But the most vital piece of the puzzle is making sure these alternatives don't just create a whole new ecological footprint. These criteria basically act as a hard safeguard. They stop companies from blindly chopping down the planet's remaining ancient, endangered forests just so they can wrap a bar of soap or a granola bar in paper instead of plastic.
And you know, this is exactly where Valerie Langer and her organization Canopy step in to act as those strict guardrails for raw materials. Canopy is a watchdog group that heavily champions what they call next-generation solutions. What does that mean in plain English? It means getting creative. It means making paper and packaging out of alternative materials like agricultural residue. We're talking leftover wheat straw or hemp instead of cutting down trees. They're there to make sure that as the world aggressively pivots away from fossil fuel plastics, we don't accidentally fuel a massive deforestation crisis just to feed a new paper habit.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, the systemic path forward.
I want you to really let this quote sink in from Pippa, the host of the Circular Economy Show. Quote, "There is no silver bullet." It just perfectly hits the nail on the head and summarizes the core thesis of all these experts. When we're dealing with incredibly complex global supply chains and massive, fragile ecosystems, there are just no magical overnight fixes. Trading plastic for paper is absolutely not a silver bullet. It is just one single piece of a very, very complicated puzzle.
Because look, if brands try to just act alone in total isolation, or if standards are created in a vacuum without any real-world input, the whole thing falls apart. The entire system fails. True, lasting innovation only happens when there's a systemic approach. That means a corporate giant like Unilever literally cannot solve this alone. They have to actively collaborate with watchdogs like Canopy and standard setters like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. This shared innovation, this crosstalk, is exactly why a corporate strategy only succeeds when it's totally plugged into the wider system.
So what's the big takeaway from all these experts? Where do we actually go from here? First, we have to responsibly scale the alternative materials that already exist right now. Second, we absolutely must innovate how we source paper, leaning hard on those next-gen solutions like agricultural residues we talked about. And third, we have to mandate cross-industry collaboration. The absolute, undeniable consensus here is that none of this works, none of it, if the standard setters, the watchdogs, and the massive corporations aren't sitting at the exact same table, pushing in the exact same direction.
Which finally brings us right back to you, the consumer. We've seen today that swapping plastic for paper is not some simple magic trick. It requires a massive, coordinated global effort to pull it off responsibly. So the next time you pick up a packaged snack and wonder why on earth the solution to the plastic crisis is taking so incredibly long, remember the staggering logistics and the crucial safeguards we just explored. The question is, are you ready to look past the illusion of the easy fix and start actually demanding the complex systemic changes our planet really needs? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those hard questions.